Thanks, everybody, for joining me again. This is another episode of the Purple Knights podcast. Tonight, I'm joined by accomplished jazz musician and founder of Jazz for Peace, Mr. Rick DellaRatta. How you doing, Rick?
Good, Chris. Thanks so much. Great to see you.
Great to see you too. So, I'm just wondering, um, could you tell us a little bit about your background as a jazz musician, and also um, why you're inspired by Prince?
Well, I grew up with all forms of music. I was very happy to play the music. I would have been happy to just play the music that you hear on the radio because I liked a lot of that music so much. I like bands like the Beatles and, all the Chicago, all those groups that we were growing up with, in the 70s. But I was kind of exploring. I was exploring the piano in the house that I was growing up with on my own. My parents ended up, wanting me to take piano lessons with a classical music teacher. So now I'm bringing that into the mix. And then as I'm, listening to all this great music that just I was hearing as a kid that, the people in the neighborhood listened to and all that, I started to come across with some just tremendous musicians that were, you'd hear within this music, when I started to get to people like, let's say, Yes or Emerson, Lake and Palmer, I started to notice that these guys were like whiz kids on the keyboard and just could play amazing things and stuff like that. Of course, you start getting into all kinds of grooves, and funk was, really great stuff to when that started coming into play and all that. And at some point or other, I started to get into jazz, kind of when I discovered it by accident in a library. So now I've got all these things rolling, and along comes this musician who, to me, it was almost like the second Stevie Wonder type of guy, because, when Stevie Wonder came around, it was like, here's this prodigy genius kind of guy who would play all the instruments on his albums. Some of his albums he'd be like playing, Stevie Wonder on the drums, Stevie Wonder doing this, Stevie Wonder doing that. And here comes this guy, Prince, who just takes the baton and starts running around the marathon, whatever it is, starts running with the baton of that kind of one man, force of nature, freak of nature, kind of. So like Prince is like, I'm just getting a vibe from this guy who's like in a basement doing it all. You know what I mean? He's singing his brains out. He's composing. He's playing, and he's a high quality musician. And he's just like this package. To me, it was an unstoppable package. You know what I mean? It was just a wonder kind sort of situation. So naturally, I started to get a vibe like, man, this guy's a serious presence. And then I end up in a movie theater with, just all these regular people watching like his movie, Purple Rain or whatever. And I'm like, man, this guy's really, you never know what he's going to do next. You know what I mean? You just never know. He might be in a movie and all your friends might be there. Because a lot of times as a musician, you're admiring the music on your own and hoping you'll turn some friends onto it. I know I used to like have kids over because we had a swimming pool in the backyard. I'd bring them over to go swimming, and we'd play some of their favorite, tunes, whoever. It might have been the Allman Brothers or the Doobie Brothers or whoever, some brothers or some sisters. And I would sneak in some Chick Corea Return to Forever just to see what would happen, would it fly over their heads or whatever. But, Prince was a musician of this high caliber, but able to you know what I mean? Like that everybody could identify with to some form or other. So he had this, just this tremendous he was a tremendous force. And he was really on the cusp of almost everything at one time for a minute there, before the things that we're going to talk about, getting sabotaged by your label, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, you as a jazz musician, I think, can really vibe with Prince and respect Prince just on the fact that he could play so many genres and so many different forms of music, from jazz to funk to rock and roll to everything in between. He has it's been said, in the fan community as well, that he has a song for every taste. So it's really unique, and it's gratifying to be able to have a podcast to talk about a musician of that caliber. And could you tell us a little bit about your organization, Jazz for Peace? Do you offer grants to budding musicians and stuff like that? Is that what you do?
Well, yeah. So basically, so what happened with me is I embraced all kinds of music, as I was telling you, and I started playing in all kinds of bands. Now, jazz became kind of something I felt like I had to. You get to these situations where it's like you have to make a choice because you realize there's only whatever however many years on the planet, and there's just too much music to experience. So I was thinking, okay, I'm definitely going to keep exploring the jazz idiom, but while I'm doing that, I have these skills and I can play any kind of music, and I enjoy playing any kind of music. So I'm playing with all kinds of bands, big band music, from the Artie Shaw Orchestra, touring with them, R&B type of flavored music, as the keyboard player for the Platters, jazz. I was the opening act and MC for Dizzy Gillespie. And then what happened was I get to the point, so then I get to the point where I come to New York, and I was doing gigs. This was kind of cool because it was like no one can afford to do New York. That's the whole thing. It's like everyone's hanging in there trying to figure, because it's such an amazing. It's kind of like those antelope. Well, this shirt is from Africa, and this is a story that I was in the Mara with these African guys taking me out there because I was helping indigenous people. And they point to all these antelopes, and they're not antelopes, but they were like antelopes, the really fast ones. I forgot, gazelles.
Oh
So
yeah, yeah.
they say, see that gazelle over there? I say, yeah. He just won a fight with all these other gazelles to reach the point where he can mate with these women. You know what I mean? These female
Yeah.
gazelles. And they said, guess what he's going to do now? I said, what? He's going to chase those gazelles without food, without water, without eating, without stopping, without catching his breath. He's going to try to mate with as many gazelles as he can until he literally drops dead. And then the next guy who wins the next battle is going to run in and try to do it. So New York is almost like that, because you're coming here to like grasp everything, but you're trying to survive at the same time as a musician while you're in the trenches of jazz. You know what I mean? You're hanging with the cats, you're going to the jam sessions, you're playing with people in little apartments, stuff like that, But your gig at night could be on a Broadway show, it could be here, it could be there. For most people it wasn't, but for some, right now, like last whatever X amount of years. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that while I'm doing that, I start getting these gigs as a piano bar entertainer in Norway, in Sweden, in Japan. And I'm going out and singing now because, in New York, they know of me as a serious piano player. But over there on these gigs, it's like they don't want to hear me. They don't want to hear any piano. They just want to hear the piano to accompany the voice. So I'm doing those, and I'm coming back with a boatload of cash. And now I can do whatever I want in New York City. You know what I mean? I don't have to worry about making the rent. You know what I'm talking about? Like,
Right.
I don't have to worry about making the rent. I got the rent. I got the rent for a long time because I just came off of this thing for 4 months or
Wow.
whatever in Sweden. Yeah. And I come back and I'd be like, okay, I'm just going to like hang and do. But it got to be like polarities. So now I realize I have to record as a leader because I've got to put it all together. I'm on a gig. I'm either singing too much and not playing, which is the piano bar circuit, or not singing at all because I'm accompanying someone, the singer in the band, you know what I mean? Or I'm on a really cool gig with some horn, some great saxophone player, his sideman or whatever, but my originals aren't being, you know what I mean? I'm not. So to put it all together, I started recording my own records. And as I started recording my own records, that led to me traveling all around myself as a leader. And from all of this touring that we've talked about, the combination, I realized that music could heal our world and solve our problems. This is just something because Chris, as you know, it cuts through every barrier that mankind has in front of us. You know what I'm saying?
It really does. It really
You know,
does.
like let's say two people can't speak the same language. I can play music and connect with that person.
Right.
You know what I mean? And
Right.
then not only that, even the art form of jazz itself is spoken in these different countries because it's embraced all over the world, you know? So you've got
Right.
music and you've got jazz that's doing it. And then you also have it crosses religious barriers, it crosses racial barriers, it crosses, you know, creed and cultural barriers. Every kind of barrier, you can kind of melt those differences. Music just
Right.
melts the differences between people. So
Right.
after 9/11, I started Jazz for Peace as a way to say, hey, wait a minute, you know, we can come together if we have the will. If we have the will, music has the way. That was my feeling. If you have the
Yeah.
will to pull,
Yeah.
you know what I mean, to come together and in a positive way and cut out all this craziness, music has the way, and Jazz for Peace can specifically get to that way by three things. One was an educational series that brings music back into the schools. Two is an instrument donation program that puts an instrument in a person's, in a child's hand, whether he has the money or not or whatever. And three is the benefit concert series, which you're alluding to. And this is something that anybody can apply. We will work with them to get them approved. And it basically is a world-class cultural event at no cost to you, plus the staffing and the expertise and the guidance to make the event a success so that we can do all of these things. Now, I'm going to say artist because you specifically mentioned artists, but you could also think of this as the Red Cross or Habitat for Humanity, people that have also been grant recipients, right? If you're a musician or you're the Red Cross, you need to expand your fan base. So we need to do that, but we also need to reward those fans you have. So these are things that Jazz for Peace works with the grant recipient to do. You also need to get sponsors at the local level. So we work with local businesses to get them involved in the event. Then you also you're under publicized, you know, so we need to make you more publicized with publicity and awareness. We also need to grow your fan base, help you get new and prestigious supporters, and most importantly, not most importantly, but very importantly, help you raise funds through numerous different fundraising techniques that we share with the grant recipient and then imply depending on which ones we think will work the best, et cetera, et cetera.
Very, very cool. And Rick, while you were talking, I was thinking, the power of music is very, to me, it's a very spiritual thing. And I've talked before on this podcast with other guests about the spiritual dimension of music. And in my experience, there's no other art form that comes close to tapping into spirituality and that whole uplifting vibe that music is. So it's great that you're using Jazz for Peace to help these musicians and help them along and help them, get started and really prosper. And it's a really great thing because music not only brings people together, it lifts people up and puts them in touch with their higher spiritual selves. I really believe that. And yeah, it's great work that you're doing. And I believe that, arts in general in schools are facing a hard go of it. And it's nice to have like your organization, Jazz for Peace, and organizations like Save the Music that are fighting to keep music in schools and keep people aware of the value of music education. So I really applaud the work that you're doing with Jazz for Peace, and people can check that out at jazzforpeace.org, right?
That's correct. Jazzforpeace.org. Yep.
Okay, sounds good to me. And um, since I have a jazz musician on, I don't often get the pleasure of hearing music played. but I thought before we went any further, I thought maybe you could play us a little something.
Be glad to. So what I'm going to do today, I do something unique for everybody, really, so that other podcasts can check each other out. People at another podcast can come to yours, and from yours go to theirs, etc. So this is going to start out with the Jazz for Peace poem that we were talking about that started Jazz for Peace. It was really a poem that started on 9/11, and I'm just going to freely improvise underneath it. Then I'm going to continue to make something up completely off the top of my head, and I call this little thing Free JA. And this is kind of a tribute to freedom of speech in general, but also journalists, the need to make sure that journalists are able to do their honest job. Reporting on things, especially things because you get these horrible situations with war, and it's so bad for civilians. And I want to make sure that journalists are not persecuted if for reporting on those things, because we have to make sure that we do not bomb civilians and do crazy things that happen during wartime. So that's called Free JA, and that's just going to lead into a little excerpt of a song called Antonio's Song by Michael Franks. And when I started, people started hearing me sing. They used to always say I sounded like Michael Franks or Chet Baker. I don't know if I will today or not, but that's who they would say. And the cool thing about this song is it kind of brings to light the problems that we're having with our environment, the rainforests and stuff like that. And it's funny, I just heard from some people in Nepal today, and this was a song that I actually sang in a concert that I did, Jazz for Peace, in Kathmandu, Nepal. So that's in Antonio's.
Wow. Okay.
I hear jazz for peace. Coming through the trees. And in my heart it fills me like a celebration. I see the light. And I want to follow, inspired by the past contributions of those that came before, and lay the groundwork for us to build on in this universal language that is a gift for all mankind. When we speak it, people are enlightened by the creativity and artistry that stands for peace and love and humanity. And intelligence that leads to reaching potential that we have in our souls, so we can raise our total conscience and see that the gift of giving is our greatest privilege. I hear jazz for peace. Tony who prays for truth. Antonio says our friendship is 100 proof. The vulture that circles reed hangs in the Saturday sky. The blankets they give the engines only make them die. Sing a song forgotten for so long. Let the music flow like light into the rainbow. Know the dance we have still have a chance to break these chains and flow like light into the rainbow. Sing a song forgotten for so long. Let the music flow like light into the dance we have still have a chance to break these chains and flow like light into the rainbow. Like light into the rainbow. Like light into the
Nice work. That was incredible. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much. That's Rick DellaRatta, ladies and gentlemen. And yeah, we're talking about Jazz for Peace. We're talking about Prince. And Prince did some forays into jazz. He wasn't a proper jazz musician, but he dabbled a little bit in all genres, as I alluded to earlier. And perhaps the most jazz heavy material that he ever recorded was under the moniker of Madhouse, which was actually just a two-man effort. It was him and saxophonist Eric Leeds um, did, I believe, three Madhouse albums in the 80s, but only two were officially released. And Rick, I know I sent you two tracks, one from the first Madhouse album, one from the second Madhouse album, and I just was wondering what were your impressions of those tracks and Prince and Eric's musicianship on those tracks?
Sure. Now the interesting story is Eric Leeds is the brother of someone on Prince's team, right? Someone on Prince's team had a jazz musician brother. Is that right? Something like that? That's what I
Yeah.
read anyway. Yeah.
Well, Eric's brother was Alan Leeds, who was actually
Okay.
Prince's tour manager,
There it is. Tour
and
manager.
actually
Right.
was actually before that was actually tour manager for James Brown.
Right. So that was the first thing I noticed. It's like, wow, he's got this tour manager who's a highly experienced tour manager, as you said. He had been a tour manager for other heavyweights, and he says to Prince, "Hey, my brother is this jazz musician." And it was like they weren't. It was like a little bit of trepidation there at first because Eric Leeds is not really coming from Prince's the other side of Prince, so much, but they
Right.
end up connecting. And then they do this stuff, and it's very interesting. Now, the two cuts specifically, one was called 4 and one was called 12. Interesting record because they're just all numbers. All the tracks are different. There's 13, which has this really badass groove,
Yeah.
and yeah, killer groove. But 4, starting with that one, the first thing I noticed was the snare drum because you hear a snare drum like that, um, you're not going to hear a snare drum on any other of Prince's music mic'd that way or just recorded that way. It's like it's a snare. It sounds like a Blue Note snare drum from like a Blue Note recording, the snare drum. You know what I mean?
Oh wow,
Sounds
yeah.
like a snare. Yeah, to me, it sounded like a snare drum from a classic jazz album snare drum. So that was the first thing I was like, wow, that was interesting the way they recorded the snare drum. So the fact that jumped out at me. But the other one was, um, it was kind of like it was blues influence, so it wasn't a blues form completely, but it was like half of a blues form, and then they kind of branched off into like the other half kind of like more of a fusion type of thing. So it had some fusion, jazz fusion elements. And the other thing that was wild was the bass on that is like virtuosic type of bass stuff. And I guess that's Prince playing the bass, I'm guessing. I mean, you said it was the two of them mostly doing the stuff, or what?
Yes, yes, yes.
So
Yep.
Prince apparently just was all just playing this, almost like it was to me it was a cross between Jaco Pastorius and uh Clark, I think. No, wait a minute, his name is Stanley Clark. Stanley Clark
Okay.
from Return to Forever, almost had that kind of virtuosity on the bass. So there was some this virtuosic electric bass sounded to me like it was fretless too. Um, and it was this almost blues thing, kind of. Um, and yeah, so that's what I picked up on that. It had these different elements to it, and it was kind of adventurous. Like I said, there was these little adventurous sort of things. There's a couple of adventurous little keyboard parts in it, but the bass is especially adventurous. I mean, it's not like it's not like a laying down a funk line on the bass. You know what I mean? He's playing all kinds of stuff on the bass. Now the other song 12 actually is a blues. That is a blues form for the most part. And what I noticed is it seemed to me that Prince was interested in capturing not so much the improvisational aspect of jazz, but the feel and spirit of the jazz era, so to speak. So this song 12, to me, it's coming out. It's like, first of all, it's jazz dance music. You know what I mean? It's like
Okay.
it's
Yep.
it's
Yep.
like it's really catered towards dance. I
Right.
mean, you listen to this track and you're not no so much hearing, a great improviser or whatever, that you would hear that maybe the jazz aficionados are going to listen to, but it's the jazz that these improvisers play through in order to make a living. They play dance gigs.
Right.
And you can almost, I mean, you feel like you're at the Cotton Club for a lot of that song. You feel like
Right.
you're at the Cotton Club in Harlem, and these girls are just swinging. The pictures that you'd see from the day. It
Right.
really it captures the nostalgia. Honestly,
Right. Right.
it captures a nostalgic feel, a nostalgic jazz dance feel, and it has also classic things. It has like a little kind of a shout chorus. You feel a little bit kind of the Chitlin circuit. You feel big band in there, that Leslie organ, from like the Chitlin circuit, because
Yep.
you used to be in those days, you used to be able to tour, and all the key, like an organ player would tour, and there'd be all these rooms that had organs in them, like a Leslie organ in the club, and they bring in different organ, like Jack McDuff, and these organ players would go from one city to the other, and they wouldn't have to bring this giant organ every place they went, at least in those clubs.
Right. Right. Well,
So
that's it. That's interesting. The flavors and the elements that you picked up on, and I could tell already, Rick, just by hearing you talk, that I have a lot to learn about music. So I'd like to talk to you sometime outside of the podcast and just pick your brain a little bit about some of that classic, you know, jazz and blues music because it's very interesting to me. But yeah, um, two great tracks, and the Madhouse stuff is pretty good. I'm more of a lyrical music type person, so um, instrumentals. I don't want to say they don't grab me because they do, but I tend to gravitate more toward lyrical music. But maybe I need to expand my mind and expand my palette a little bit more. But yeah, the Madhouse stuff is certainly very interesting and a very was done in a very prolific era for Prince. That 1985, 1986 era was very prolific for Prince, and Eric Leeds was a fixture in Prince's bands for much of that time and even a little bit afterwards. So yeah, very interesting stuff. And I know Rick, you also wanted to talk a little bit about Prince's battle with Warner Brothers because it sheds a little light on how Prince was forward thinking in terms of how the music business was going to change and evolve through the years. And he was very prescient as far as, seeing into the future and seeing how musicians would be compensated, or as a matter of fact, there would be lack of fair compensation and representation for artists. And Prince was able to see that and fought for his independence as an artist. And I know you wanted to speak a little on that. So, what would you like to say
Well,
about that?
so now I told you, here I am. I find out about this guy, Prince, and he's so talented and he can do all these things, like I said, kind of a force of nature, playing all these instruments himself on some of these tracks. And, coming out with some great hits. I mean, just classic hits. I mean, tunes like Little Red Corvette and things like that, are, what could you say? They're timeless, But at the same time, he's a complete artist, and here he is, getting these kind of record deals that artists of his stature don't so much get. I mean, normally you're just the singer songwriter or something like that. Maybe you have a stretch where you get deals like that. But now you're bringing someone. So this is like something that's, it's like it doesn't mix, you know what I mean? Because the first thing the company wants to do is simply cherry pick. They want to minimalize, they want to get the most bang for their buck, and they just want, Prince to give them one or two songs that are give them a couple of Little Red Corvette type of songs. That's all the label's looking for,
Right,
And Prince
right.
wants to develop, he wants to develop his artistry, he wants to develop his music. He's got all kinds of ideas, and he was prolific, as we know now, from all these things that are in the vaults that never got released. I mean, there's so much stuff that he's recorded. So he's in this horrific situation where, he's competing against other like total pop stars when he's got all of these other talents that are not necessarily going to compete on that level, because you're not, like you're saying yourself, you're not going to have and the audience for instrumental music that you're going to have for certain types of pop music, etc. So a big battle ensued with the record label. I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but I can just imagine, it took a lot out of him. I imagine that he could have easily been isolated, when you're like a star, but you don't, you're not one of the guys anymore, but you're one of the guys in spirit. All of these traumatic sort of conflicts, these conflicts that arise between artist and label, et cetera, et cetera. And, towards the end there, the situation where he had that issue with fentanyl, right? I mean, apparently he was on a bicycle trying to get fentanyl late in his life, shortly before, his passing, which was another tragedy, right?
Yeah, yeah, for
Um,
sure.
it just it makes you really wonder. I mean, we what we think, see, the thing is, in our minds, we think, oh, wouldn't it be great to have this or that, or this record deal, or these millions, or this, that, and the other. But, we don't really realize what it actually ends up being. Sometimes it can be problems that you never dreamed of, conflicts that you can't resolve. And I think there was a person, there's an interview of that guy who had all those hits, Rick Astley, where he said at the height of his fame, he was suicidal. He was literally seeing a psychiatrist because he was having suicidal tendencies, at the height of his fame. You know what I mean? So it's
Yeah,
like, you know what I mean? It's just not what we think it is. I think Rob Lower, one of those guys, could have been Robert Downey Jr., someone said, but someone said, I wish everyone could, get a major record label and sign a deal or become a great movie star so they can see how that is not the answer in terms of your own happiness, your
right,
own,
right,
you know what I mean?
right. I mean, and that's where Prince said in a interview in December of 1999 with Larry King. He said that he had to search deep within himself and decide whether money and fame were more important, or spiritual health and growth. And he chose spirituality over fame and and fortune, in terms of importance in his own life and in his own heart and soul. And I think there's a it's a slippery slope, right? Because being famous, you get recognition and you get fame and adulation and all that. But when it comes down to it, what does that do for your humanity? It isolates you, it frustrates you, uh, it limits you in a way, because you're not able to live authentically and true to yourself. Um, you have to keep up this image, this persona, that the label puts on you or wants to market you as, and I think that was Prince's main issue with the label, was that they were they were holding his artistry back. They were holding his ability to um, produce, art. They were holding it hostage, so to speak.
Right.
Um, and I think that was Prince's main issue with the label, was they were he likened it to, of course, being an African American man, he likened it to a form of slavery, which
Right.
was controversial at the time, and it's still controversial to think in those terms today. But as an African American man, I get that that's where he would know that would be the prism through which he would see that. Um, and then towards the end of his life, he was finally able to get the rights back to his own masters, and that was huge for Prince in 2014 when he got back with Warner Brothers. But the whole struggle with his label was about, um, from my perspective, it was about artistic freedom and freedom to, um, create, you know, unfettered, unbound by any restriction or any imposed belief of what an artist should be or how they should um, act, according to a label, or a PR team, or whatever you want to say. Um, what do you think about that, Rick?
Well, absolutely. I mean, just so I don't forget, I wanted to say, a couple of really, just to get an idea of the level of his artistry, a couple of interesting things were his cover of Betcha by Golly Wow.
Yes.
holy Jesus, you know what I
Yes.
mean?
Yeah.
When you can cover somebody else's song and like at that, just it's mind blowing, really, what he did with
Yeah.
that tune, and it's a great tune, but he like nailed it. You can do somebody else's tune, but that doesn't mean you're going to do the kind of justice that he brought to that song. So it's an
Right.
incredible cover. And then the solo that he took in "While My Guitar Gently Weeps," where he just blew the house down.
Oh
That one
yeah.
with Tom Petty and
Yeah.
all those guys. If you want to hear the kind of music, the kind of the level of musicianship that he was at, check out that, those are two things to check out anyway, of I'm sure a large handful. But back to this, I think what happens is, the label is, it's a corporation, it's a monster, it's a separate entity, and they're looking to create something of you that they sell to the public. And then what happens is you find out that the public is adoring something eventually that's not you. So now
Right.
the public is liking something, but that's not you, and you can't get out of it. So now what you are is trapped. You're like captured. You know what I
Right.
mean? And
Right.
the Elvis movie actually brought that up about the situation
Yes.
with Elvis,
Yes.
because
Yes.
he wanted to do these other things and he wanted to go in these other directions. And, they're like, no, 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 we want to sell, we're selling this Mickey Mouse version of Elvis. You know what I mean? And then,
Right.
we're going to make Mickey Mouse sales by selling you as a caricature kind of thing.
Right. Right.
And and the other thing was, Prince was at a time when I started to notice myself greatest hits albums coming out of bands that like were still alive, they're still breathing, they're still young. You know what I mean?
Right.
Here's Prince probably in his 20s. I don't know. He definitely wasn't out of his 30s. And a greatest hits album. And even Prince himself is quoted as saying, you put out a greatest hits album when you either die or you want the artist to die. That's like, it's the
Right.
last thing. And that's what they're, and so he's on like his third album with Warner Brothers, and already they want it to be a greatest hits album because they think that's what's selling now, the greatest hits of everybody. But that's basically a past tense
Right.
release.
Right.
That's not even a current release, a greatest
Right.
hits album. So imagine, what you would feel like if you're him and the label's telling you, here's your next album, your greatest hits. Almost like we're retiring you,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, that's true.
And so how do you dodge all of those things? I don't think you can without a certain amount of aging and maturity. At this level where I'm at, I kind of study philosophies like Stoicism. I've even said it on a couple other podcasts because I do want people to check it out. If you think you're going crazy, try to study what, some of these teachings of this guy, Marcus Aurelius, who basically just scribbled all these little notes, and he never meant to publish it, and they found it. And then there's these other guys, Epictetus or whatever, that also were similar, and they put them all together and they call it a sofa. But it's a way for you to cope with some of these things, because otherwise, you could end up going crazy, or you could end up, turning to drugs as an escape for emotions that can't really be. They can't. I see Prince as a person who got caught in situations where there isn't a proper human emotion to describe the feeling that you're having. You know what I mean? The
Right.
heartbreak.
Right.
You're being turned into a dead figure, or a figure that is not you anymore, but they're asking you to like that. And this happens with a lot of artists. An example that I was thinking of just recently is, for example, the Mississippi River, is drying up, supposedly. I don't know if you heard about it, but, the Mississippi River, which is one of our great rivers, and it's drying up. And, if it really is drying up, which it may be, because from what I've seen, if things don't turn around, we could lose, this is like America's greatest river. is there really an emotion that fits that? No. But what they're doing is what the article will do. The article will say, yeah, the Mississippi River is drying up, and that's causing a problem for, boats to move their products. So in other words, Kellogg cornflakes or Rice Krispies might have lower profits because they can't get their cornflakes. So now you can have a human do, oh, what a shame. This multi-billion-dollar company is going to sell less Rice Krispies. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
That's a human emotion you can fit to it. But the Mississippi River itself drying up, there isn't really an emotion that fits that, because it's an unbelievable, it's an unfathomable tragedy, right? Because
right,
it's part of American culture, American history. I mean, our studies of everything. The Mississippi River's been running. It's not
right,
something we can fathom. And so this is what I think happens to artists who get famous. And how the hell do you deal with that? Because your time is going on. The audiences are identifying with something that's not you, and you have to somehow, you're changing yourself, and also you can't unring the bell. So if you
right,
get famous, you can't say, well, you know what, I don't like this, I don't want to do this anymore. You can't do that, Chris.
right, right,
That's tough. That's tough,
right,
because
right.
I'll tell you personally, it's funny because these people wrote to me today from Nepal. I was in Nepal, and for some crazy reason, I was famous for like one day there, because I was traveling around Nepal. Everything was fine. They were taking me to the people I was helping and all that kind of stuff. And I was with it. And nobody, but then the concert happened. And I was like, I wonder what kind of concert this is even going to be. I don't know, what this is going to be. And it was downstairs in this large hotel that I was staying at. And I just walked down there just to peek around. It was like hours before the event. People were like coming up to me, wanting to take the selfies and grabbing me and all, you know what I mean? Like as if I was Prince in America, you know what I mean?
Right,
In the 80s.
right,
Really? Yeah, and I'm like, what was that? So I somehow made it through all of these selfies and this and that, and like, and I made it back to my room. I was like, that was surreal. That's like, what the heck was that? And when I went back to the concert, when I had to go down because we're getting ready to start the event, it was happening. I was ready for it now, but it was like, it was the feeling of being famous, but like just for just like a dosage of it. You know what I mean?
right,
And I'll
right.
tell you something, man, I would not want to. I wouldn't know how to deal with that. I wouldn't want that, because you can't go outside. You can't go anywhere.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? I mean, your
yeah,
privacy is gone. You can't undo it. You can't say, "Oh, I've decided."
right,
No, you can't unring the bell.
right,
So that day, I was like, because the concert was sold out, and there were people outside. So it's a country, it's not like America or whatever. It's not like, oh, there's no tickets, I'm gonna go home. No, the people were outside the place. It was an event. They couldn't get in, but they were outside having the event.
right,
The event
right,
was going on in their mind outside. It was Jazz for Beats, and I went to go to the bathroom because there were these other acts, that were on the thing, and I wasn't going to sit through all of them. And someone looked at me like, "You're gonna do what?" I'm just gonna walk out and go to the bathroom and come back. And they looked at me like, "Oh, do so at your own risk, buddy." Like that look. I'm
yeah.
like, and I'm like, what? I don't know. These guys are strange, looking at me strange. I'm just gonna go to the bathroom. I don't know what they're thinking. And I opened that door, and and it took me 45 minutes to get to the bathroom. That was 2 minutes away, and another hour to get back from the bathroom. And by the time I get back, they were waiting for me on the stage to start my second half of my show, or my final, you know what I mean? So
Yeah,
it was, I mean, I can't tell you, I don't know how I would survive that. I don't know how I would survive if that was on a daily basis. You know what I mean?
yeah. I mean, I've always viewed, fame as something that's a little dangerous for the exact reasons that you're saying. Is you can't go outside, you can't do normal things, you can't be yourself, you can't relax or let your guard down or let the superstar persona down, you know, any
Right.
any minute of any day. And so I always say, like, I talk to people about this podcast. Yes, I would like to be known. I would like to be respected for what I do, but I certainly don't want to blow up, in a viral way, because that's when things really get crazy. And like you say, you can't unring the bell after that. So I'm kind of walking the fine line with this podcast of booking great guests, musicians and producers and engineers who have worked with Prince, and it's always a joy and a pleasure. But I worry at the same time about getting too much exposure. So I kind of like the fact that I'm, you know, semi anonymous. I'm known by a group within the Prince fan community that really support me, and I really appreciate their love and support. But I think you know achieving fame is not why I do this podcast. Why I do this podcast is out of respect for Prince and his artistry, and also respect for other musicians and people who have been impacted by his work and are carrying on his efforts of charity and music education and things like that, like you're doing, Rick, with Jazz for Peace.
Thanks. Well, what I also think is cool about what you're doing is you're giving people a chance to also learn about Prince from other angles. You know what I mean?
Right,
Because all most people have is, what the TV said, or what they saw in the gossip column. You know what I mean? Whereas you hardcore fans have a much deeper dive into him as a human being, as an artist, etc. Much more personal.
right, right. Well, I appreciate it, and I appreciate your coming on the show, and I appreciate your wonderful music that you shared with us. And again, that's jazzforpeace.org. Go there, check it out, support it. I'll be posting the link in the description for the podcast, so be sure and check that out. And before I let you go, Rick, where can we find you online and on social media and all that?
Well, one thing I tell people is because I know with you, there's going to be some musicians watching, watch your podcast, and maybe people that are connected to outstanding causes. And what someone can do is, when they watch your podcast, is say, "Hey, I saw you on Chris's podcast," and then I watched a couple other things, or I went to the website, or I, Googled Jazz for Peace, etc. And I'd like to know more about what you guys do, these events, how you put them on, how you help outstanding causes. You can send an email to us at info@jazzforpeace.org, and just send us an email. What we do is we call that a little seedling, and when someone becomes a grant recipient, it grows into a tree.
Right, right. So, well, thank you very much for spending time with me today, Rick, and I wish you tremendous success and tremendous goodwill, and thank you so much.
My pleasure, Chris.
All right, on behalf of myself and Rick DellaRatta, I'd like to say thank you, everybody, for watching on YouTube or listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or Blog Talk Radio. And until next time, peace and be wild. Thanks, everybody.